He woke choking on his own breath, hands shaking, skin slick with cold sweat, while something ancient clawed its way behind his eyes. The Alpha's pupils fractured, flashing with a darkness that did not belong to him, and a sound tore from his chest that was not a growl, not human, not wolf. Across the room, the Omega froze, heart hammering, as the air thickened and the walls seemed to lean closer. She felt it then, the curse stirring, hungry and awake at last, and knew with sickening certainty that whatever was coming for his soul would not stop until one of them was gone. He woke choking on his own breath, hands jerking violently against the sheets as if something beneath his skin was trying to escape. The room was dark, yet his eyes burned, pupils shuddering and splitting as shadows crawled across the whites. Cold sweat drenched his body, soaking through linen and fur alike, and a low, broken sound tore from his chest. Not a growl, not a scream, but something older and wrong. The Alpha clawed at the air, gasping, while an unseen pressure crushed his ribs from the inside, tightening with every heartbeat. The Omega was already moving. She crossed the chamber barefoot, ignoring the sting of stone beneath her soles, reaching for him as another tremor seized his body. The moment her fingers brushed his wrist, a shock rippled through her, sharp and freezing. His skin was icy, far too cold, and beneath it she felt something shifting, coiling, as though his very soul were being rearranged. She swallowed a cry, forcing calm into her voice even as dread curdled in her stomach, because fear, she had learned, only fed whatever was hunting him. He convulsed again, head snapping to the side, lips peeling back to reveal teeth bared in a snarl that did not belong to the man she loved. For a split second, his gaze locked on hers and she saw it, a flicker of awareness drowned beneath a tide of black. His eyes begged her to help him, to save him, and then the darkness surged, dragging him under once more. The Omega's heart slammed painfully against her ribs, because she had seen that look before, in old stories whispered to children as warnings. The Pact healers called it a sickness, a rare affliction of the blood. They spoke of imbalance, of exhaustion, of stress borne too long by an Alpha who carried too much responsibility. They brewed tonics and burned herbs, murmured prayers to benevolent spirits, and assured her it would pass. But she knew better. She had felt the wrongness the first night it began, a cold presence sliding through the bond she shared with him, testing its strength. Whatever this was, it was not new, and it was not gentle. Another groan wrenched from his throat, deeper this time, vibrating through the stone walls. The torches along the chamber guttered, flames shrinking as if starved of air. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, pooling at the corners of the room, and the Omega's breath caught when she realized they were moving independently of the light. She pressed her forehead to his chest, listening to his heart stutter and race, and whispered his name like a plea, hoping it could still reach him. Her touch grounded him, for a moment. His body went rigid, then sagged, breath rasping in shallow pulls. The darkness in his eyes receded just enough for recognition to return, and his fingers twitched weakly around her wrist. "Don't," he murmured hoarsely, the word barely sound at all. Whether it was a warning or a request, she could not tell, because the shadows surged again, swallowing his gaze before she could ask. She stayed with him until dawn bled pale through the high windows, counting each uneven breath, each tremor, each moment he remained tethered to this world. When exhaustion finally dragged him into a fitful sleep, she pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could hold her heart together by force alone. This was not happening by chance. This was a reckoning. The curse had always been spoken of in fragments. A betrayal sealed in blood centuries ago. An Alpha who had bartered something sacred for power, binding his lineage to a debt that could never truly be paid. Most believed it a myth, a story designed to keep rulers humble and Omegas obedient. But standing there, watching the man she loved fight an invisible war inside his own body, the Omega understood the truth with terrifying clarity. The debt had come due. By midday, his condition worsened. Fever burned through him, then vanished, leaving him shivering and pale. His pulse faltered, then raced, as if something were testing how far it could push without killing him outright. Each episode left him weaker, more distant, and the bond between them strained, stretched thin by something that pressed against it from the other side. The Omega felt that pressure constantly now, a whisper at the edge of her thoughts that grew louder whenever he suffered. He tried everything. Ancient healing songs taught to Omegas long before Pacts built cities. Salves infused with silverleaf and moon water. Prayers offered to every benevolent force she knew. Nothing slowed the descent. Each failure carved deeper grooves of fear into her chest, because she could feel time slipping through her fingers, grain by grain, toward something irreversible. On the third night, as the moon climbed high and heavy with light, the Omega collapsed beside his bed, head spinning with exhaustion and grief. She dozed fitfully, dreams tangled with waking dread, until a sound pulled her sharply back. Not his groan, something else. A low hum, melodic and distant, threading through her thoughts like a forgotten tune. She froze, heart pounding, as the sound resolved into a lullaby her mother used to sing, one she had not heard since childhood. The words were wrong, twisted. Where comfort should have been, there was warning. Images flooded her mind. Stone circles choked with vines, symbols carved in blood, an Omega kneeling alone beneath a broken sky. She gasped, clutching her head as the vision sharpened, showing her a ritual so old it predated the Pacts themselves. A ritual no one spoke of anymore because its cost was too high to name. When the vision shattered, she was on her knees, breath coming in ragged pulls. The Alpha stirred restlessly behind her, shadows already gathering at the edges of the room, as if sensing they had been seen. The Omega stared at her trembling hands, the echo of the lullaby still ringing in her ears, and understood that the answer she had been dreading had finally found her. There was a way to save him, and it would demand everything she was. The Omega did not sleep again. When dawn came, it found her seated on the stone floor beside the Alpha's bed, back against the wall, eyes hollow and burning with a purpose that frightened even her. The lullaby still echoed in her mind, its warped melody threading through her thoughts like a hook lodged too deep to remove. She did not tell the healers what she had seen. She did not tell the Pack elders what she now suspected. Some truths, she understood, could not survive being spoken aloud. By nightfall she was in the lower archives. The space lay beneath the old keep, a forgotten warren of stone corridors that smelled of dust, oil and time. Few came here anymore. Fewer still were permitted. The Omega moved quietly, lantern held close, its weak glow licking over shelves bowed with age. Scrolls lay stacked like bones, tablets etched with symbols no one bothered to translate anymore. This was where discarded history was left to rot, and she knew, without knowing how, that this was where her answer waited. She began with the oldest records. Lineage charts inked in fading reds and browns. Accounts of wars no one celebrated. Names scratched out, amended, erased. She followed the Alpha's bloodline backward, generation by generation, until the writing grew erratic, the margins crowded with warnings written in different hands. Words like debt, oath, watcher appeared again and again, never explained, always avoided. Hours passed unnoticed. Her hands cramped, her vision blurred, but she did not stop. Each fragment she uncovered fit into the vision she had seen, tightening the noose around her heart. This was not a sudden curse. It was a contract, a pact struck in desperation, renewed silently with every heir born unaware of the price hanging over them. Near midnight, she found the first reference to the ritual. It was not named. It was never named. Instead, it was described obliquely, hidden within a commentary on balance restoration, written in a language so old it felt wrong on her tongue as she translated it piece by piece. The words spoke of equivalence, of scales that must be evened. of darkness that could only be displaced, never destroyed. And beneath it all, a single recurring phrase chilled her blood. A soul may be shielded only by another willingly unmade. Her breath hitched. She read it again, slower this time, as if careful pacing might soften its meaning. Did not. The text continued, offering clarifications that made her hands tremble as she turned the page. The ritual did not kill swiftly. Siphoned. It consumed in stages, drawing out memory, identity, essence, until what remained could no longer be called a soul at all. Survival was possible, the text claimed, but rare. Most who attempted it were spiritually obliterated, scattered so completely that not even the afterworld could reclaim them. The lantern flickered. She slammed the book shut, pulse roaring in her ears. This was madness. This was why the ritual had been buried, stripped of name and context, left to decay in the dark. No Pact would ever sanction it. No Alpha would ever allow it. And yet the words burned behind her eyes because she knew, this was the solution the lullaby had shown her. A sound echoed down the corridor. The Omega froze, heart slamming painfully as she extinguished the lantern and pressed herself into the shadows. Footsteps passed, slow and heavy, then faded. Only when silence returned did she breathe again. The secrecy of her search was no longer caution. It was necessity. If anyone learned what she was reading, they would stop her. And if they stopped her, the Alpha would die. She returned to the text, devouring it now, fear sharpening her focus. Additional fragments referenced a convergence point, a place where old energies bled thin, where the boundary between soul and spirit weakened. The ritual required components that bordered on myth, gathered under precise conditions. Failure meant immediate death. Success meant uncertainty. The authors were frustratingly vague on that point, as if even they had not known what survived on the other side. As she read, something shifted within her. Not courage, not acceptance, calculation. She began to plan. By the time she left the archives, the moon was setting, and her body ached with exhaustion. She climbed the steps back toward the Alpha's chambers, each footfall heavier than the last, dread coiling tighter with every breath. She braced herself for what she might find, because the text had warned of this too. As the entity grew stronger, the host's awareness would fade. The door was ajar. Inside, the Alpha lay still, too still, chest barely rising beneath the furs. His face was gray, lips tinged blue, and shadows clung to him like a second skin. The Omega rushed to his side, pressing her ear to his chest, relief crashing through her when she caught the faint, uneven thud of his heart. But the bond between them was thinner now, stretched to translucence, as if something were chewing through it strand by strand. His eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she thought the darkness had taken him entirely. Then he focused on her, confusion clouding his gaze. "You look tired," he murmured faintly, voice stripped of its usual strength. The irony nearly broke her. She forced a smile, brushing damp hair back from his forehead, even as her chest ached with the weight of everything she now knew. "You scared me," she said softly. He frowned, as if trying to remember why. "I keep dreaming," he whispered. "Something is calling me, promising rest." His fingers twitched weakly in her grasp. "If I don't wake up one day." She cut him off sharply, fear slicing through her composure. "Don't say that." He watched her with unfocused eyes, then nodded, already drifting again. She stayed until his breathing deepened, until the shadows loosened their grip just enough for her to move. When she finally stood, her legs shook, not from weakness, but from resolve settling into place like a blade locking into its sheath. He could not know. He must not know. The ritual required ignorance from the one being saved. Consent would fracture the balance, the text had warned. The Alpha's fading mind, clouded by the encroaching darkness, made him unknowingly complicit in the very act that would save him. The cruelty of that irony pressed hard against her ribs, but she accepted it, because the alternative was unthinkable. As she left the chamber, she glanced back once more. The shadows stirred, reacting to her movement, almost curious. The Omega met them head-on, jaw set, heart steady despite the terror gnawing at her core. They could watch. They could wait. She was done hesitating. She knew what the ritual would take. And she was already counting the pieces of herself she could afford to lose. The place revealed itself to her at dusk, as though it had been waiting all along. The Omega felt it before she saw it, a pressure behind her eyes, a low vibration beneath her feet that set her bones humming uneasily. She followed that sensation beyond the outer borders of the Pact lands, past wards most wolves avoided instinctively, until the forest thinned and stone rose from the earth like the ribs of a long-dead giant. Moss and roots choked the ruins, but the power lingering there was unmistakable, old and raw and only partially asleep. This was the Nexus, an ancient convergence where ley lines knotted and frayed, where the world's skin wore thin from centuries of use and abuse. Once sacred, later desecrated, abandoned when the cost of drawing on its power became too high to justify. The Omega stepped into the clearing, breath shallow, every sense on edge, because the silence here was not peaceful. It was watchful. She set down her satchel and slowly turned in place, taking in the broken pillars etched with symbols half erased by time. Some markings matched those she had seen in the archives. Others twisted into unfamiliar shapes that made her stomach tighten. The ritual text had warned of this. No two nexuses were identical, and each demanded something different from those foolish or desperate enough to use them. The ground pulsed faintly beneath her palm when she knelt. She swallowed hard. There would be no witnesses, no healers, no elders. Just her, the Alpha's failing soul, and whatever still lingered here from the first pact. The isolation pressed down on her chest, but she welcomed it. Fear shared became fear multiplied, and she could not afford hesitation now. She began to prepare. The first task was gathering the components, each one more dangerous than the last. She moved swiftly, guided by the fragments she had memorized, the rhythm of the broken lullaby echoing faintly in her thoughts. The lunar bloom came first, a pale, ghostly flower that only opened beneath a precise alignment of moon and star. She waited hours for it, hidden among the trees, muscles coiled tight, until the petals finally unfurled with a soft, almost mournful sound. When she cut it free, the sap burned cold against her skin, and she nearly dropped it, teeth clenched against a rising wave of nausea. The second component took longer. Tears of a mythical creature were not easily obtained, especially one that had not been seen openly in generations. She tracked it through ravines and forgotten valleys, following signs most wolves would have missed. Scorched stone, warped air, the faint scent of ozone. When she finally found the creature, it watched her with ancient, knowing eyes, as if it understood exactly why she had come. She did not beg. She did not explain. She simply knelt and waited, heart pounding, until one luminous tear slid down its scaled cheek and struck the ground between them. It vanished the moment she touched it, absorbed into the vial she carried, leaving her hands shaking violently in its wake. The last component nearly broke her. The blood of an innocent, given willingly. The texts had been clear. Unwilling sacrifice tainted the ritual, twisting its outcome. She could not take. She could only ask. The Omega stood at the edge of the Pact lands, staring at the sleeping village below, throat tight with dread. She thought of children, of elders, of lives that did not deserve to be entangled in this curse. And then she realized, with a hollow ache spreading through her chest, that the text did not specify another. Willingly given. Her hands trembled as she drew the blade across her palm, hissing softly as blood welled up, rich and dark. Pain flared sharp and immediate, grounding her as she let it drip into the waiting vessel. The cut sealed slowly, as if reluctant to close, leaving her dizzy and light-headed. She pressed her fist to her chest, breathing through the rush of weakness, because this was only the beginning. By the time she returned to the nexus, night had fully claimed the sky. She arranged the components with meticulous care, each placement deliberate, each symbol carved into the dirt traced from memory. The air grew heavier with every line she completed, thick with an energy that prickled across her skin and raised the fine hairs along her arms. She could feel eyes on her, not physical ones but something deeper, older, evaluating her resolve. Her hands paused over the final marking. This was the point of no return. If she stepped away now, the alpha might still linger for days, perhaps weeks, but the entity would only grow stronger, more entrenched. The debt would come due eventually, claimed in blood and madness. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to breathe, to remember why she was here. His laugh, his quiet patience, the way he always listened when others spoke over her. Love surged up, fierce and aching, burning through her fear until it hardened into something unbreakable. She finished the symbol. The nexus responded immediately. A low rumble rolled through the clearing as the ground shuddered, stones grinding against one another. The air vibrated, humming with power barely contained, and the torches she had set around the circle flared to life all at once, flames bending inward as if drawn to the center. The Omega staggered back, pulse racing, because the ritual had begun reacting before she had spoken a single word. Something was waking up. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammer wildly, and forced herself to focus. Doubt clawed at her thoughts. Fear of failure, fear of damnation, fear that she had misunderstood the text and doomed them both. The weight of her choice settled heavily on her shoulders, threatening to crush her beneath its enormity. For a heartbeat she wavered. Then she straightened. Resolve settled over her like armor. Whatever this ritual demanded, she would endure it. Whatever price it extracted, she would pay it. The Alpha's life was worth more than her fear, more than her certainty of survival, more than her soul if it came to that. As the wind picked up, spiraling inward, carrying whispers she could not quite understand, the Omega stepped into the center of the circle and lifted her chin. She had gathered everything the ritual required. All that remained was to offer herself. The first word tore itself from her throat like a living thing. It vibrated through the nexus, low and resonant, sinking into the stone beneath her feet as if the earth itself were listening. The torches flared higher, flames twisting into unnatural shapes, and the air thickened until every breath felt weighted, deliberate. The Omega stood at the heart of the circle, spine straight despite the tremor running through her limbs, and spoke the second word before fear could steal it from her tongue. Power answered. It rushed toward her in a suffocating wave, pressing against her skin, her lungs, her mind. The markings she had carved ignited one by one, glowing with a dull, ancient light that crawled like molten veins across the ground. She felt it then, the ritual locking into place, an unmistakable click in the fabric of reality that told her there would be no stopping this once it truly began. Her voice shook on the third line, but it did not break. She focused on the Alpha. He lay at the edge of the circle where she had placed him moments earlier, body unnaturally still, chest barely rising beneath the thin furs. Shadows clung to him, thicker here than anywhere else, writhing like living smoke. As she spoke his name within the incantation, those shadows reacted violently, recoiling, then surging forward with renewed aggression, as if enraged at being acknowledged. The ground between them shimmered. Something tore free. The Omega gasped as she saw it, a faint, luminous outline lifting from the Alpha's body, shaped like him but softer, fragile around the edges. His essence. His soul, or what remained untouched by the curse. It flickered weakly, pulled in opposite directions, tethered to his body by thin strands of light while thick, oily tendrils of darkness wrapped around it, dragging it back toward oblivion. The tug of war had begun. Pain lanced through her chest without warning, sharp and blinding, dropping her to one knee. She cried out despite herself as the ritual drew on her life force, siphoning warmth and strength in a steady, merciless stream. Sweat poured down her spine, soaking her clothes, and her vision swam as the glowing lines at her feet brightened hungrily. She forced herself upright. Each word now felt like swallowing glass, but she spoke them anyway, voice hoarse, throat burning. With every syllable, a thread of her essence unraveled, flowing into the circle, weaving itself around the Alpha's struggling soul. She could see it happening, feel it happening, her light binding to his, reinforcing it even as the darkness fought back harder. The malevolent entity finally revealed itself. It did not have a single form. It surged up from the shadows in fragments. Too many eyes, too many mouths, shapes that shifted and collapsed in on themselves. Its presence was suffocating, reeking of old bargains and rot. The moment it fully manifested, the air screamed, a high-pitched whine that made her teeth ache and blood trickle from her nose. Mine, it whispered, the word echoing directly inside her skull. She nearly faltered. The pressure intensified, crushing, relentless, as the entity wrapped itself around the Alpha's essence, tightening its grip. The Omega screamed his name, reaching out instinctively, and when her hand brushed the luminous outline of his soul, a surge of memory slammed into her. Stone halls drenched in blood. An Alpha kneeling before the same shadow centuries ago. A desperate bargain struck beneath a dying moon. The ancestral echo was brief but devastating. She saw the first pact clearly now. Saw the terror, the arrogance, the certainty that future generations would bear the cost so one life could be spared. Rage flared hot and bright within her, cutting through the pain like a blade. She was not that Alpha. She would not repeat his mistake. With a ragged cry, she twisted the incantation. The text had warned against deviation, but desperation sharpened her instincts, guiding her where rigid adherence would fail. She redirected the flow of energy, turning the siphon inward, feeding the entity's own power back through the nexus. The ground cracked beneath her feet as the circle flared blindingly bright, and the creature shrieked, its many mouths opening in unison. The backlash slammed into her. Her body arched as agony tore through her nerves, white-hot and consuming. She tasted copper, vision fracturing at the edges, as the ritual demanded more, always more. Her knees buckled, but she stayed upright through sheer will, refusing to collapse while the Alpha's soul still hung in the balance. The entity thrashed, struggling to maintain its hold. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Then the darkness surged again, stronger than before, wrapping around the Alpha's essence and yanking hard enough that the tether to his body stretched thin, nearly snapping. The Omega screamed, sound ripping from her throat, and lunged forward, pressing her forehead against the barrier separating them. "I'm here," she sobbed, voice breaking at last. "You're not alone." Something shifted. Within the luminous outline of his soul, a spark flared, small, defiant, but undeniably his. The darkness recoiled as if burned, loosening just enough for her to seize the opening. She poured everything she had into that connection, memories, love, devotion, binding them together with a ferocity that left nothing held back. The entity roared, the sound tearing at the fabric of the world. Light and shadow collided at the center of the circle, blinding, deafening, as the ritual reached a critical point. The Omega felt herself unraveling, pieces of her slipping away into the torrent of power, and dimly realized she might not survive this crossing. As the nexus convulsed and the Alpha's soul teetered on the brink, she understood with terrifying clarity. Whatever happened next would decide who, if anyone, walked away from this ritual whole. The darkness learned her name. It slithered through the nexus like spilled ink, recoiling from the blinding flare of the ritual only to regroup with terrifying intelligence. The Omega felt it coil around her thoughts, probing, testing, searching for fractures it could widen. The moment her resolve wavered, just for a breath, it struck. The world shifted. She was no longer standing in the circle. She stood alone in the Alpha's chamber, sunlight spilling warmly across the stone floor, birdsong drifting through the open windows. He sat at the edge of the bed, whole and laughing, eyes bright and clear, his hands steady as they reached for her. Relief flooded her so violently her knees nearly gave out, because this was what she wanted more than anything. Then he looked past her. His smile faded. His gaze hardened, filling with quiet accusation. "Why did you come back?" he asked softly. "You already failed me once." The illusion cracked her like glass. Pain ripped through her chest as the scene dissolved, replaced by another. The pack stood in a wide circle around her now, faces twisted with disgust and betrayal. Elders spat at her feet. Healers turned their backs. Somewhere behind them, the Alpha lay lifeless on a stone bier, eyes dull, his blood soaking into the ground. "Your sacrifice meant nothing," the entity whispered, its voice layered and cruel. "You were never enough to save him." Her breath hitched. Doubt surged, sharp and invasive, because the visions were too precise, too tailored to be coincidence. The darkness knew her fears intimately, wielding them like weapons. It showed her futures where the ritual failed, where she died screaming, where he lived only long enough to curse her name for what she had done without his consent. Her hand shook violently. The nexus trembled in response, torches flaring erratically as her focus slipped. The glowing markings dimmed, their light faltering, and the Alpha's luminous essence flickered dangerously, its edges fraying under the renewed assault. The entity laughed, a sound that reverberated through her bones. "Yes," it crooned. "Break for me." She nearly did. Her knees buckled, body sagging as exhaustion and despair crashed over her in a suffocating wave. Her skin felt translucent now, stretched too thin over fading warmth. Each breath came shallow and ragged, lungs burning as if filled with smoke. She could feel her aura unraveling, threads of light snapping one by one as the ritual continued to drain her. But even as the darkness pressed in, something stubborn remained. A memory surfaced unbidden, not grand, not dramatic, but achingly simple. Rain falling softly over the Packlands. The Alpha sitting beside her beneath a tree, cloak draped over both their shoulders. Silence, comfortable and unforced, broken only when he reached for her hand, squeezing once as if to say, "I'm here." The memory burned brighter than the illusions. She clung to it, anchoring herself as the entity screeched in fury, its psychological assault intensifying. It threw her childhood grief at her, whispered that she was disposable, that omegas existed to be consumed. It promised oblivion, sweet and painless, if she would only stop fighting. Her vision tunneled. Blood trickled freely from her nose now, dripping onto the stone at her feet. Her heart fluttered erratically, struggling to maintain rhythm as the ritual pushed her beyond her limits. For a terrifying moment, she felt herself slipping, falling inward away from her body, toward a void that beckoned with deceptive calm. "I choose him," she whispered. The words were barely audible, but they rang through the nexus like a bell struck true. The memory surged, expanding, wrapping around her like armor. The Alpha's soul responded instantly, its fading light flaring in recognition, strengthening where it touched hers. The darkness recoiled violently, tendrils snapping back as if burned. Entity shrieked. Enraged, it lashed out with raw force, abandoning subtlety for brutality. Psychic pressure slammed into her, knocking her flat against the stone, pain exploding through her spine. She screamed, the sound ripped from her throat as the creature tried to crush her outright, to end her resistance in one decisive blow. The Alpha's essence surged forward. For the first time it acted on its own. It pressed back against the entity, light flaring defiantly, and the Omega felt it. His will, weak but unbroken, reaching for her through the bond they shared. That connection tightened, stabilizing her just enough to keep her conscious. She gasped, dragging air into her lungs because he was fighting now too. Together. The realization sent a surge of strength through her battered body, fleeting but vital. She forced herself upright, swaying, and locked eyes with the writhing mass of darkness. Her fear was still there, roaring and relentless, but beneath it burned something fiercer. Love sharpened into defiance. The nexus shook violently as the ritual reached another breaking point, energy screaming through the circle in wild arcs of light and shadow. The Omega felt her grip on herself slipping again, the cost mounting too fast to endure much longer. And yet, as the entity gathered itself for a final, crushing assault, she saw it. Flaw. A momentary thinning in its form, where its hunger outpaced its control. The knowledge struck her like lightning. If she acted now, she might end this. If she hesitated, everything would be lost. She did not think. Thinking would have killed her. The Omega moved on instinct, driven by the sharp, terrible clarity that comes only when there is nothing left to lose. The flaw she had seen pulsed before her inner eye. A thin seam in the entity's structure where its hunger folded in on itself, unstable, overextended. It had grown too confident, too eager to consume her completely, and in doing so had exposed the one place it could be wounded. She lunged. The ritual screamed in protest as she altered it again, twisting the final lines of the incantation into something dangerous and untested. Power surged through her body, ripping a raw cry from her throat as it tore through nerves already frayed beyond endurance. She felt something inside her tear loose, memory perhaps or identity, and vanish into the torrent fueling the circle. The pain was indescribable. Her vision exploded into white, then fractured into shards of color and shadow. Every nerve in her body lit up at once, agony so complete it erased everything else. She collapsed forward, palms slamming into the glowing stone, blood splattering across symbols that flared hungrily at the offering. The nexus shuddered, cracking outward in jagged lines as if the earth itself were screaming. Entity reeled. For the first time since revealing itself, it faltered, its many forms collapsing inward as the redirected energy slammed into its core. It shrieked, a sound so violent it distorted the air, thrashing wildly as its own stolen power was forced back through it, burning, unraveling. "No!" it roared, voices overlapping in a discordant chorus. "You are not enough." The Omega laughed weakly, blood on her teeth, vision swimming. "I don't need to be." She poured the last of herself into the opening she had created. There was no reserve left, no safety net. She reached down into the deepest part of her being, the place that held her name, her sense of self, and tore free a final fragment, offering it to the ritual with shaking hands. The circle blazed blindingly bright, light erupting upward in a column that split the sky. The Alpha's soul surged. Freed from the crushing grip of the darkness, it snapped back toward his body, light blazing fierce and whole for the first time since the curse had awakened. The entity screamed again as the tether snapped violently, ripping it free with brutal finality. The expulsion was cataclysmic. Darkness was wrenched from the Alpha's body in a violent torrent, dragged screaming into the heart of the nexus. The ground buckled, stones shattering as the entity was crushed inward upon itself, its form unraveling under the weight of its own stolen power. With one final guttural shriek, it imploded, collapsing into a burst of light so intense the Omega thought it would burn her eyes from their sockets. Then silence. The torches guttered out all at once, plunging the clearing into darkness broken only by the faint glow of dying symbols etched into the ground. The air hung heavy and still, ringing with the echo of what had been lost. The Alpha lay motionless, his soul fully rejoined, chest rising in a slow, steady rhythm. The Omega collapsed. Her body hit the stone hard, limbs trembling uncontrollably as the ritual released its grip at last. She could not move, could barely breathe. Every inch of her felt hollowed out, scraped raw and emptied. The world pulsed dimly around her, edges blurring, sound distant and warped. She was alive, barely. Her fingers twitched weakly, curling against the cold ground as she fought to stay conscious. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, seductive and soft, promising rest. She almost welcomed it, until she felt it. Faint warmth. It bloomed behind her eyes, small and fragile, but unmistakably present. A thread of light flickered within her chest, pulsing weakly, as if something essential had survived the tearing. Tears slid down her temples, soaking into the stone beneath her head. She had not been erased. As her vision faded completely, the last thing she saw was the Alpha stirring, just slightly. His fingers twitching as the curse's hold finally, mercifully broke. And she did not know if she would ever wake to see what she had saved. Consciousness returned to him slowly, as if the world were reluctant to let him back in. The Alpha surfaced through layers of darkness, breath tearing into his lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. His body jolted, muscles seizing as air burned through him, and for a terrifying moment he thought the curse still had him, that the suffocating weight, the endless pull, had only tightened its grip. Then the pressure eased, and he realized he was breathing freely for the first time in weeks. Light filtered through his eyelids. He opened them cautiously, senses screaming as they reoriented. The clearing swam into focus. Cracked stone, scorched earth, the remnants of symbols fading into nothing. The air smelled of ash and ozone, sharp and clean. Whatever had been choking his mind was gone, leaving behind a raw emptiness that made him feel exposed, stripped bare. Memories slammed into him in fragments. Cold. A voice calling him back. He pushed himself upright with a groan, hands shaking violently as strength returned in uneven waves. His heart pounded hard but steady, no longer erratic, no longer under siege. The bond he shared with the Omega flared suddenly, bright and agonizing in its intensity, and he froze. It was thin. Panic spiked, sharp and immediate. He turned, scanning the clearing, and saw her collapsed at the center of the shattered circle. She lay unnaturally still, skin pale against the dark stone, chest barely moving. Her presence in the bond was faint, there but fragile, like an echo on the verge of fading. He was at her side in an instant. He dropped to his knees, gathering her carefully into his arms as if afraid she might break. She was cold, too cold. His hands trembled as he brushed hair from her face, thumb catching on dried blood at the corner of her mouth. Horror clawed through his chest as the weight of what he was seeing settled in. "What did you do?" he whispered, voice breaking. She did not answer. He pressed his forehead to hers, breath hitching as a wave of grief and gratitude crashed through him in equal measure. He did not remember the ritual. He did not remember the entity's voice or the moment it was torn free. But his body remembered the absence of it, the sudden, shocking clarity that had followed, and instinct told him that clarity had been bought at an unbearable cost. Her fingers twitched weakly. Relief nearly dropped him to the ground. He pulled back just enough to look at her face as her lashes fluttered, eyes opening slowly, unfocused and dim. When they found his, a faint smile touched her lips, fragile as spun glass. "You're awake," she murmured, voice barely audible. He laughed once, broken and breathless, and gathered her closer, cradling her against his chest. "You saved me," he said hoarsely. It was not a question. It was an understanding that settled deep in his bones, undeniable and devastating. Her smile faded. "I did what I had to." He shook his head, emotion choking him. He wanted to demand answers, to know everything she had sacrificed, But one look at her drained face silenced the questions. Whatever she had done, it had taken more than blood. More than strength. He could feel it in the altered shape of the bond between them, stretched and reformed into something deeper and more painful than before. Pact found them at dawn. They approached the clearing cautiously, drawn by the violent surge of energy that had rippled across the land hours earlier. When they saw the Alpha alive, standing, whole, eyes clear, relief spread quickly, followed by confusion as their gazes fell on the Omega in his arms. Murmurs rippled through the gathered wolves, awe and fear mingling in equal measure. No one spoke. The Alpha did not explain. He simply held her tighter, daring anyone to question her place or her worth. The authority in his stance was unmistakable, but beneath it lay something new. Vulnerability, raw and unguarded, that softened his expression as he looked down at her. "She needs rest," he said quietly, finality ringing in every word. They obeyed. Back within the safety of the pack, the Omega drifted in and out of consciousness, never fully waking, never entirely gone. The healers worked tirelessly, but their usual methods faltered against injuries that were not wholly physical. They whispered among themselves, unsettled by the faint, otherworldly glow that occasionally shimmered around her skin. The Alpha did not leave her side. He watched over her through the long hours, hand wrapped around hers, grounding himself in the proof that she was still here. When she stirred, even slightly, he leaned closer, murmuring reassurances he did not know she could hear. He did not sleep. He could not. When she finally woke fully, it was to the sound of his breathing, steady and real beside her. Their eyes met, and in that quiet moment no words were needed. Everything that mattered passed between them in the silence. Gratitude, love, sorrow, and an unspoken vow that whatever scars remained, they would face them together. But as he pressed his lips to her knuckles, relief warming his chest for the first time since the curse began, he felt it, a faint tremor in the bond. Something unresolved. Something that had survived the ritual, waiting patiently in the space between heartbeats. The Omega healed slowly, and not in ways the pack understood. Her body regained strength first, color returning to her cheeks, warmth settling back into her limbs, but something beneath the surface remained altered. The Alpha noticed it in the quiet moments, when she thought herself unobserved. Her gaze would drift, unfocused, as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. At times, a faint, pearlescent shimmer traced the edges of her skin, vanishing the instant he tried to look directly at it. The healers could not explain it. They murmured about residual energy, about shock to the spirit, about consequences of power no Omega was meant to touch. None of their remedies addressed the way she sometimes flinched at empty air, or the way her breath would hitch when the wind shifted through the trees, carrying whispers only she seemed to sense. The Alpha felt it too, through the bond. It had changed shape after the ritual, deepened and stretched into something more complex than before. Where once it had been a steady, comforting presence, now it carried echoes. Emotions not entirely her own brushed against him at odd moments. Ancient sorrow, distant fury, a vast, patient awareness that made his chest tighten with unease. He hid his concern carefully, because every time he looked at her, alive and breathing, gratitude drowned out everything else. But gratitude did not erase the debt. At night, he dreamed of the nexus. He saw the ground split open, light and shadow colliding again and again, replaying the moment she collapsed in an endless loop. He woke with his heart racing, hand outstretched, half expecting to find her gone. Each time, she was still there beside him, solid and warm, yet something in her felt just out of reach, like a melody he could no longer quite hear. The pack noticed the change as well. They treated her with reverence now. Eyes lowered, voices hushed when she passed. Stories spread quickly. Whispers of an Omega who had faced an ancient curse and survived, who had stood alone against a force that had devoured alphas for centuries. Some looked at her with awe, others with fear. The elders began recording the event in their chronicles, carefully choosing their words, because none of them truly knew how to describe what she had become. Not broken, not untouched, something else entirely. The Alpha's leadership changed in the wake of it all. He ruled with a quieter intensity, listening more than he spoke, weighing decisions with a depth that unsettled those accustomed to his former decisiveness. He felt the weight of her sacrifice in every choice he made, a constant reminder carved into his bones. Protectiveness hardened into devotion, fierce and unyielding, directed first and foremost toward her. He owed her more than his life. He owed her the future. One evening, as twilight bled across the sky, the Omega stood at the edge of the Pact lands, staring into the forest beyond. The Alpha approached silently, stopping just behind her, watching as she lifted a hand slightly, fingers trembling as if tracing invisible currents in the air. "You feel it too," she said softly, not turning. He did not deny it. "Something remains." She nodded, expression unreadable. "The entity is gone. But curses like that don't disappear cleanly." Her hand curled slowly into a fist. "They leave impressions." A chill crept down his spine. "On you." Her silence was answer enough. She finally looked at him then, eyes luminous in the fading light. "I don't regret it," she said firmly, as if sensing the question he had not voiced. "I would do it again." He stepped closer, cupping her face gently, grounding himself in the reality of her. "I know," he said, voice rough. "But I need to know what it cost you." Her gaze flickered, just for a moment before she leaned into his touch. "More than I can explain," she whispered. That night, the wind carried unfamiliar sounds through the Pact lands, soft disturbances, subtle shifts in the unseen currents that only the most sensitive among them noticed. Candles guttered without reason. Dreams grew vivid and strange. Somewhere deep within the forest, something ancient stirred, drawn by the echo of power that still clung to her soul. The Alpha lay awake beside her, listening to her steady breathing, trying to convince himself that this was peace. But as her aura flared faintly in the darkness, pulsing in time with a rhythm not entirely her own, a single chilling thought took root in his mind. Saving her Alpha had not ended the story. It had only changed who the story was about now. The first sign was the silence. Not the peaceful kind that settled over the Pact lands at dawn, but a hollow absence that felt scraped clean, as though something had swallowed the natural rhythm of the world. Birds stopped singing along the eastern ridge. The wind shifted unpredictably, carrying scents that did not belong to any season. Wolves began reporting dreams that bled into waking thought, visions of stone circles, burning symbols, and a woman standing alone at the center of them, light pouring from her hands. Always her. The Omega felt it long before anyone spoke of it. She woke one night with her heart racing, breath shallow, fingers digging into the furs as a pressure built behind her eyes. The bond flared painfully, spilling fragments of sensation into the Alpha's mind before she could pull them back. He sat up instantly, reaching for her, but she was already slipping away, awareness sliding into a space that was neither dream nor waking. She stood in a vast, starless expanse. Voices whispered around her, countless, overlapping, neither hostile nor kind. They spoke in fragments, in impressions rather than words, brushing against her consciousness like cold fingers testing her shape. She felt herself being examined, measured, weighed against something immeasurably old. "You changed the terms," they murmured. She did not answer. She could not. The presence withdrew just as abruptly, and she gasped awake, body slick with sweat, lungs burning. The Alpha was there, hands firm on her shoulders, grounding her, but his expression was tight with fear. "You left," he said quietly. "For a moment you weren't here." She shook, pressing her forehead to his chest. "I know." From that night on, the phenomena escalated. The Omega began sensing disturbances long before they manifested, ripples in the unseen fabric of the world that made her skin prickle and her heart ache. She could feel when old wards weakened, when spiritual echoes stirred beneath the soil, when something forgotten shifted in its sleep. The knowledge came unbidden, heavy and relentless, settling into her mind like a responsibility she had never asked for. The Pack elders watched with growing unease. They consulted ancient texts, cross-referencing the events at the nexus with half-forgotten accounts of similar rituals performed in other eras. The conclusions they reached were never spoken aloud, but the Alpha saw it in their eyes. The Omega had not merely survived the ritual. She had been changed by it in ways that placed her outside the boundaries of what the Pack understood. She stood at a crossroads now. The Alpha felt the tension building, a slow, inexorable pull drawing her toward something beyond the Pack lands. He saw it in the way she lingered at thresholds, in the way her gaze followed unseen paths through the forest. Love and fear twisted together in his chest because he knew that keeping her close might no longer be enough. One evening she told him the truth. "I don't think the curse is gone," she said softly, staring into the firelight. "Not entirely." His jaw tightened. "It was banished." "Yes," she agreed. "But in breaking it, I changed how it functions." She met his gaze, eyes steady despite the tremor in her hands. "The debt no longer belongs to your bloodline. It belongs to me." The words hit him like a physical blow. He reached for her instinctively, pulling her into his arms, but she did not relax as she once had. Something within her remained taut, alert, as if she were listening for a call only she could hear. "What does that mean?" he asked, dread threading through his voice. "It means fate isn't finished," she replied quietly. "It means the universe noticed what I did." Beyond the Pack lands, strange occurrences multiplied. Travelers spoke of lights flickering deep in the woods, of ruins briefly revealed where none had stood before, of whispers that promised knowledge in exchange for attention. Each report tightened the knot in the Alpha's chest, because he felt the connection between those disturbances and the woman beside him with unshakable certainty. She had become a beacon. That night, as they stood together beneath the stars, she rested her head against his shoulder, fingers curling into his cloak. "I don't know what comes next," she admitted. "But I know I can't ignore it." He kissed the top of her head, heart aching with love and fear. "Whatever it is," he said firmly, "you won't face it alone." She smiled faintly, but her eyes reflected the starlight with an unsettling depth, as though they now looked farther than the sky above them. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of the Pack's senses, something ancient shifted its attention. The debt had been rewritten. But rewritten debts, she was learning, were rarely forgiven. The dawn rose differently after the Pact. It came softer, as if the world itself were cautious, light spilling slowly across the Pack lands in pale ribbons instead of bold gold. The Alpha stood at the high ridge overlooking the valley, the Omega beside him, both of them silent as the first rays touched the earth. Below, life stirred. Wolves emerging from their dwellings, fires being lit, the quiet persistence of a world that had come frighteningly close to unraveling. From a distance they looked unchanged. Close, the truth was impossible to ignore. The Omega's presence had weight now. Not dominance, not command, but gravity, an undeniable pull that bent attention toward her whether she wished it or not. When she breathed, the air responded subtly, currents shifting as though acknowledging her existence. The Alpha felt it through their bond, a steady hum layered beneath her familiar warmth, something vast and patient that neither of them fully understood. The Pack had begun to tell her story. At first it was cautious, whispers shared at the edges of gatherings, fragments shaped by fear and awe. An Omega who walked into shadow and returned. An Omega who paid a soul's price and lived. Over time, The story hardened into legend, passed with reverence rather than terror. Children listened wide-eyed. Elders lowered their voices. Her name was spoken carefully, as if it carried power of its own. She did not correct them. Legend was easier than truth. The Alpha watched the transformation with conflicted pride. He saw how the pack looked to her now, not as fragile, not as subordinate, but as something unprecedented. A living reminder that devotion could be stronger than bloodlines, that love could rewrite ancient law. It reshaped how he ruled, how others followed, how the future would be taught to those not yet born. The forbidden pact had not just saved him, it had redefined them all. Privately, the weight of knowing pressed heavily on both of them. They spoke often in the quiet hours, voices low, hands entwined, trying to map the boundaries of what she had become. She told him of the whispers that came less frequently now, as if the universe itself were still deciding how closely to watch her. She told him of the sense of standing at the edge of something vast, a threshold she could feel but not yet cross. "I'm still me," she said once, pressing his palm to her chest. "But I'm also more." He believed her, and he feared for her. There were moments, rare, fleeting, when he sensed her attention drift beyond the physical world, awareness brushing against forces that dwarfed even the curse she had shattered. Each time, he anchored her gently, reminding her of warmth, of breath, of the steady rhythm of shared life. Their bond held, resilient and reshaped, strong enough to bear the strain. Now, on the anniversary of the ritual, they returned to the nexus. Nature had already begun reclaiming the scars. Cracks were softened by creeping moss, shattered stone veiled by new growth. Only the faintest echo of power remained, humming beneath the surface like a memory the land itself refused to forget. The Omega knelt at the center, resting her palm against the earth, eyes closed. "It's quiet," she murmured. The Alpha knelt beside her, vigilance etched into every line of his body. "Too quiet." She smiled faintly. "No, just listening." They stood together as the sun dipped low, light fracturing through the trees, casting long shadows that no longer writhed or whispered. Whatever had been bound here was gone. Whatever remained lived on, in her, in the altered weave of fate she carried with such quiet resolve. As they turned to leave, the Omega paused, gaze lifting to the horizon where sky and forest blurred into endless possibility. A subtle pulse rippled through her aura, unseen by all but the Alpha, and his breath caught. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. She considered the question, then shook her head. "No," she said. "I chose you. I would always choose you." He took her hand, grounding and solid, and together they walked back toward the life they had salvaged from the brink. Behind them, unseen and unrecorded, the world shifted almost imperceptibly. The forbidden pact had ended a curse, but it had also created something new. A legacy not of debt, but of awareness. Of sacrifice that echoed forward instead of back. Of a love strong enough to alter the rules that governed gods and monsters alike. And as the new dawn broke fully over the Pact lands, one truth lingered in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. The battle they had survived was only the first chapter of a far greater understanding.